Studies show that the most effective way to change minds is by using both empathy and clear, respectful communication. Research suggests that people are more likely to reconsider their beliefs when they feel heard and understood rather than attacked. By presenting evidence that aligns with their values, addressing emotional barriers, and fostering a sense of trust, we can make individuals more open to new perspectives. Importantly, cognitive dissonance, where conflicting information challenges existing beliefs, can nudge people towards change, especially when they're given time to process and reflect on new information. But what about ourselves? To combat our own closed-mindedness, research shows the importance of cultivating intellectual humility and curiosity. In other words, merely acknowledging that you might be wrong or that your understanding is incomplete opens doors to learning. Exposing yourself to diverse perspectives, especially those that challenge your own beliefs, helps you keep far away from the echo chamber effect, where familiar beliefs are reinforced, even if they're false. If so many studies indicate that this is the best way to change people's minds, as well as to prevent ourselves from being closed-minded, why do so many people on both sides treat conversations as battles that devolve into shouting matches, name-calling, and the trading of bumper sticker cliches? That's not my style, and it's not the style of today's guest. If you believe you are open-minded about your religious beliefs and would like to have a good conversation with some folks just as open-minded, but who have yet to be convinced that there is a God, please give us a call, because the show starts now. Hello, welcome everybody. Today is August 18th, 2024, and I am your host, The Cross Examiner. And joining me today is our very special guest, Seth Andrews, who is the host of the Thinking Atheist podcast and many other things. How are you doing, Seth?
I'm well. Thanks for letting me play along today. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on. It's always a pleasure to watch you work. For those of our viewers who may not have heard of you, although we probably have to search high and far to find them. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Well, I'm an ex-evangelical. I was raised in a devoutly religious home. I was that guy, I was student leader, student council president. I was a spokesperson for Youth for Christ, right? I was kind of a communicator at an early age and was raised with Christian everything all around me. Christian school, Christian church, Christian friends, Christian music. In fact, I got into FM Christian radio for a dozen years. So I played Amy Grant, Stephen Curtis Chapman, and Whiteheart and all those bands. And then I got into video production and started doing work mostly for churches. It was interesting. We were doing a lot of fundraising videos. And so we helped churches all around the country raise money. But under the surface, I was really starting to struggle with doubt. It wasn't adding up. And finally, in my late 30s, I decided to hell with it. I'm going to go figure this out. So I went back to Genesis 1:1, and I was introduced to the work of some seminal people. I mean, I read The God Delusion, and when it released, and it blew my mind. And Christopher Hitchens, I caught a debate by him almost by accident, and he blew my mind. And before I knew it, that there was just no going back. The house of cards was falling down around me. And so that was 2007, 2008. I was in my late 30s. And after I got out of the faith, it was a different environment 15 years ago. We didn't have all the resources online that we do today. We certainly didn't have the platforms and the websites and the shows. We had a few, but we didn't have a lot of communicators or storytellers. And so I thought, well, maybe I've got something to offer. And I started the thinkingatheist.com website in 2009, the Thinking Atheist being an icon, an idea, because I came out of a faith culture, fake it till you make it, believe until you know it's true because I believe it's true. Mm-hmm. And after I came out of the religion, I was like, well, what a terrible way to figure out whether or not something's accurate is to take it on faith. And so the Thinking Atheist was an encouragement to myself and everybody else. Let's think on these things. Let's use reason. Let's engage the brain. And there was a big response. I was blown away. So I started producing videos for that channel, a YouTube channel. I started the podcast in 2010. And here we are 14 plus years later, and I'm still kicking. They haven't kicked me out of the party. So it's an honor to be here. And I'm honestly, I'm glad to be here. Some people have asked, well, don't you ever miss religion? And I'm like, well, there were a few things related to community that I might miss a little bit. But the truth is that the community that I have now, who accept me for me on, our own terms, with respect, with challenge, with this wide level of diversity, with the opportunity to discover something every single day. I mean, I wouldn't trade that for the world. So it's really kind of my Christian community is kind of it pales in comparison to what I have now. And I'm thankful to be a part of the conversation in the overall and today on the Atheist Experience. So thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can totally relate to that, conflicting views of community. And I was wondering if you had a similar experience where any community is going to have some rules in place of behavior. Like the sort of secular community is going to be like, hey, don't be a jerk, or we don't want to hang out with you, and don't break the law, and those sorts of things. But it seems like religions, especially high demand religions, come with an extra set of conditions that if you violate those, they're going to shun you. Did you feel that pressure while you were in the faith, that not only do I have to be a normal, just good person, but I also have to keep up the appearances or go along with anybody, or there will be consequences?
Yeah, I think any high control tribe can do this, and it doesn't have to be religious. There are some religions that are not that way, but high control religions, absolutely. I remember when I first started to doubt. I mean, at first I didn't articulate my doubts because I felt that sense of, well, what if something happens? Or what if they think I'm weak, or I'm the devil's whispering in my ear, or will they start to just not include me, or maybe the equity of who I am or how much they trust me will go down. It's one of those things where I felt like I always had to qualify for the office, whether it was being a son or a sibling or a spouse or whatever. And so there are a lot of reinforcers. Religions have, tribes really have evolved a lot of reinforcers that keep people from saying aloud some of the things they might be secretly thinking. And I felt that. And, I was right to be nervous about it, because in 2007, my parents, theologian level believers, I mean, hardcore. Gotcha. My parents met at Oral Roberts University. And for anyone who doesn't know, Oral Roberts was a massively influential televangelist faith healer in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he built a college in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that's where they met. They honeymooned in the Holy Lands. I shit you not, Graham.
Wow.
I was conceived in the Holy Lands.
You were the chosen one, Seth.
Irony. I mean, what are the chances? My mother taught New Testament Greek. I mean, there was just no religious small talk. So you can imagine, I go to my parents and I expect them to have good answers because they're the experts. And I don't know if you've had this experience, or anybody watching has had this experience, but whenever an expert answers a question and you really think about it, they actually drive you further away from the answer they want you to have. It's like when you talk to somebody about Noah and his family having sex with each other, mom and the wives, and all of that intermarrying, or whatever you want to call it, incest. And you say, well, how can people have incest? Why would you be okay with that? And then they come up with a rationalization, and they say, well, our DNA was purer back in Bible days, and so incest was actually appropriate under the eyes of God. Well, that's one of those apologetic excuses, one of those Ken Ham answers that the second you hear it and you're not in the bubble, what the hell are you talking about? So the more questions I started to ask and the more answers I got back, the more I realized I'm onto something. Like, there is something seriously wrong. And then I felt kind of stupid for taking so long to get out of the faith. But they went on high alert, right? Danger. We have a problem. A sheep has left the fold. We have to rescue. Prodigal alert, prodigal alert. And so it was a barrage. And they tried everything. I like to say it's like you're in the castle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the opposing army comes and they will try every angle. So they tried the love thing. Oh, we love you. If only you knew the love of Jesus. Then they tried the shame thing. You're embarrassing the family with all this talk about atheism. And then they tried threats. Hell's a real place. You'll burn forever. You don't want to go to hell, do you? And one after the other. And it cost, my apostasy cost me a lot in terms of the relationships with my family.
Mm-hmm.
My father and I were pretty much estranged when he passed away. I was there at his deathbed, and we had a moment of semi-reconciliation. And my mother and I simply do not speak. And I want to clarify that Mom and I don't speak, not because we have a difference about religion, because the vast majority of people in my circle, whether it's my neighborhood or on my tennis team or whatever, are Christians, and they're lovely people. Okay.
Yep.
So it's not that Mom was a Christian. I'm an atheist. You dumbass. What are you thinking?
Right.
It was about boundaries. It was like, the constant stepping into the threshold of my life to say and do pretty awful and always inappropriate things. And so then you draw the line and you say, Mom, I love you. I appreciate the fact that you're my mother. Thanks for all the sacrifices you made. I know you mean well, but you don't get to do this. And you've brought me to a point where if it happens again, there will be consequences. And do you understand? And the answer was a reluctant yes. And then 2 days later, there was a violation. And I'm like, now the consequences must kicked in. Because with respect, I think that also includes self-respect. And so my mother and I simply do not have a relationship, and I don't really connect much with my biological family because of the consequences, the lack of respect and acceptance and those types of things. And I'm guilty of using this community, my own community, the atheist, humanist, secular movement as a whole, to sort of fill that gap. Sometimes family is the family that you choose. So, yes, I've seen the consequences, and they happen in so many contexts. Think like us, be like us, look like us, sound like us, marry like us, love like us, vote like us, or else. And I'll tell you, the minute somebody says that to you, huge red flag. That is your first indication that this is a high control environment that you may need to escape. Sorry for the long answer, Graham, but you got me. No. This is what happens when you invite a host to guest host or co-host. I just blather on. Go ahead.
No, it's wonderful. This is the stuff that I find interesting. I think my audience on my podcast enjoys these conversations. So I want to ask you one more follow-up, and please continue to give these great answers. So the follow-up is then one is an observation that leads to a question. So the observation is, of all the authors and hosts that you mentioned during the early aughts and all of that, my favorite book is Religion Poisons Everything. God is Not Great by Hitchens. And many people, especially on the theist side, sort of misinterpret that title, but I think you just demonstrated exactly what it's talking about. It's not that religion wants you to do evil things necessarily. It's just that because you get into this mindset, it poisons relationships, it poisons families, it poisons communities with these conditional rules. So the question then is, if you're in this poisonous environment growing up, you obviously had, it seems like by your own admission, a fairly decent bullshit detector established. Where do you think that came from? That other people that maybe had a similar upbringing as you didn't have the bullshit detector, or maybe your bullshit detector was just stronger than other people's?
I was slow. I mean, I was 37. And I was saying, I mean, I used to, I'm embarrassed, and I shouldn't be, because I need to give myself more grace on this score. But how many years did I think that a donkey spoke Hebrew in the book of Numbers? Like, why did I not stop and say, I'm sorry, a donkey spoke Hebrew? 900-year-old humans and people living for 3 days submerged inside prison fish. and chariots that were aflame that flew into the heavens, and a virgin who got pregnant via ghost sex so that the offspring could be turned into a giant meat puppet for the salvation of humankind. I mean, I swear to you, I feel like I came super late to that party, I have had a lot of conversations, though, about what causes someone to be that curious or get there, to give themselves permission to doubt, and what keeps other people not. Either they're super comfortable, they enjoy being believers, and a lot of people do. They get security and comfort. It alleviates the fear of death. They like the idea that there's someone somewhere in control. Well, that's comforting in this crazy world. The community, I'm honestly convinced most people are not religious for reasons of theology. I think they are religious for reasons of community. I always like to say there are 5 major factors when it comes to higher control religions. Not necessarily higher control. The determiners and the people and the things that keep people inside. It's family, geography, ritual, community, and comfort. Man, those are 5 powerful elements that cause people to be religious. And honestly, I used to be more pissed off about, I used to use very broad general terms about religion. Religion is this, religion is that. But there are so many thousands of flavors of religion, and a lot of them I just don't give a shit about. Like, if you want to be in a religion that is not trying to take away the rights of other people and doesn't want to establish a theocracy and install Gilead, and you're an egalitarian, humanitarian, loving culture, and you happen to believe in a deity somewhere, I mean, okay, we can have that conversation, but you're not remotely first on my list. Are you happy? Are you not hurting anybody? Are you teaching your kids magical thinking, or are they still plugged into the real world? I mean, there's all of these other questions.
Yeah.
And I think we have become, I hope, a little less clumsy about these broad, overreaching single brands. If most of the planet of 8 billion people is religious, you can't just say religion is, and it covers everybody, because there are so many, just like there are flavors of people. But, I don't know why some people become more dissatisfied and other people lock down. But I have become very aware that there are a ton of people who do have that whisper of doubt in the back of their skull. And all they need is to discover that there's someone else who is asking the same questions, and that spark might ignite. Otherwise, they might just sit on it, right? Oh, it's back there. I don't know. But if someone validates them and they're like, oh, maybe I've got a point. Maybe there's a good reason for us to actually ask whether or not this was true or that was true, or if this is moral or whatever. Man, all it takes is a little encouragement sometimes, and people will immediately start to take that journey. We just need to encourage them that you should give yourself permission to do it. So I don't know. I'm babbling a little bit. I don't know why some are more skeptical than others. I do know that people are complex, and I think we need to create a safe space where they can question without being shamed for doing so.
I 100% agree. It reminds me of the most recent episode of your podcast, I believe. You were speaking with Coleman Watts, who was in a cult, but the cult was not religious. And that's sort of the point I wanted to bring up here, is everything you're describing isn't unique to religion. It's unique to tribalism or communitarianism or whatever you want to call it, this high pressure, I want to belong, and those around me are telling me things either because they're my parents or trusted colleagues, and I accept them either uncritically or I've become convinced based on shaky evidence or whatever. And there is this sense that he was discussing about being embarrassed and coming out of it. And that's a big barrier to a lot of people, that they double down sometimes because they know that if I admit that a position that I took on this for years was wrong, I am going to lose face, or I'm going to be embarrassed. Just look at the Clergy Project, right? A bunch of people who are still pastors, but secretly in a support group for people who don't believe, and they can't leave either because they'll be embarrassed or because they were raised with no skills. Their only skill is to be a pastor. So I think that feeling that you're expressing about that community and how it can be tough to get out and embarrassing and all of that stuff is something that a lot of our listeners can probably relate to. So I want to thank you for sharing that. That was very, very good to hear.
I've been doing a lot of interesting research into our evolved tendencies toward tribal thinking and the shortcuts our brain takes. And I've become very aware that the people who say that they're not susceptible to bias, or, I'm a skeptic now, I'm not going to be led around by my emotions, and I can't be fooled, I'm a logical beast. Those people who say they can't be fooled, was it Feynman who said that the people who think they can't be fooled already have been, right?
Right.
And tribalism can be a good thing. I mean, we see instances of communities who are tribes. We evolved to exist in communities. I think we're better together. But I think with every good incarnation, we can find the dark side. And I have seen it. You'll find certainly in religious tribes. I find it interesting that then they have sub-tribes, like you've got the Baptists, but wait, are you an independent Baptist, or are you a free will Baptist? Are you Southern Baptist? Are you First Baptist? There's all these different splinters.
The old Emo Phillips joke.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But I've seen tribalism with atheists and the way they other and talk about religious people. It's so sad to watch.
Yep.
I've seen political parties do it. And trust me, I'm a proud liberal who is excited about the opportunities that may be ahead of us. But I'll tell you, I have had people who are my fellow libs who will post something about the political opposition that's factually wrong. Okay. It's just, that is factually incorrect. So what I do is I'm like, well, hang on just a second. I fact checked what you just shared at a knee jerk, and it is not true. This did not happen. And this is important because there's enough ammo out there that we need to be, creatures of the data. Let's make sure that we're sharing accurate information. And you would be shocked. Well, maybe you wouldn't be, Graham, at the pushback that I get. Well, you know what? It's something they would have done. Well, I don't care what I just got wrong. It's nothing compared to what they do wrong. And immediately you see that when did do facts matter become a problematic question? And we see this with any group, any tribe. And I have seen some people in atheist circles where if somebody has an opinion they don't like, or it becomes they have a moment of contention, they will kick them out of their sort of mental block, out of their circle, other them, sometimes dehumanize and commit to destroying them. And I have become so overwhelmingly despondent at how the internet has rewarded this behavior. Not that there aren't hard lines to be drawn, not that there are not hard targets. Hell, anybody who watches my work has seen me go after the Ryan Walterses in Oklahoma and the Marjorie Taylor Greene and blah, 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 and all the people that were trying to totally eliminate the church-state wall and the oppressors and the white supremacists and all those things, okay? But in the one-on-ones with people, I'm just shocked at how quickly anybody, and I include many who are proud, professed atheists, even atheist activists, who immediately dehumanize. They remove the humanity of the other person and say, you just said something awful, evil, whatever. You are now dead to me. I am going to remove you from my immediate circle. I will not say another syllable to you. I will now only talk about you, and I will commit my resources to your absolute destruction. And
Right.
I don't think that's how we change the world, Graham.
Yeah.
So.
No, absolutely. I remember back in, the early aughts, when I first heard a politician use the word tribalism, it was Bill Clinton was being interviewed about his favorite movies, and he said something about tribalism, and it really that's it. That's the word I've been looking for. And he was framing it as the challenge of the next 100 years is to try to get past tribalism. And it comes into play in all these areas. And at that same time, we were starting to get the iPhone came out, and I was so naive, Seth. I was like, oh, this is amazing, this Wikipedia thing, and we all have these supercomputers in our pockets, everybody's going to be able to fact check things on the spot. It's going to lead to an industry. Like there's going to be a consumer reports for quality information, and websites will put logos on their site that say they're quality info sourced, certified, and people will demand great and certified information. And wow.
Yeah.
Everybody ran to their corners and found the weirdos that they couldn't meet physically and teamed up. And it has been tribalism, virtual tribalism ever since then.
And that internet has made it one click away. You can find anybody who has whatever niche belief that you have, right?
Yep.
No matter how wacky. Graham, there is a culture of people who are germ deniers, right?
Yep.
It's 2024. Yep. It's I thought flat Earth was bad.
Right.
Germ deniers. And all you have to do is take one quick search on the internet and you will find a tribe that will welcome you, and you will live in that little information or disinformation silo, and you can just be reinforced. And then you go out and you're attacked by other people, so you feel persecuted. Well, then you go back to your tribe and you feel even more like Robin Hood going out against the man, against the system. And I don't know what the sequel is. I watch a lot of the content from a friend of mine at thinkingispower.com. Melanie Tresick King is a refreshing voice in this conversation that sort of talks about understanding how bias works and how when we take beliefs personally, even when it's a good thing, that it can lead us in problematic directions, and trying to get in front of the psychology behind beliefs. Not only does it allow us to help perhaps temper what we do, take a breath, take a few steps, proceed cautiously, do our due diligence, but I think it also helps us to remember the humanity in the people that we are encountering in this world, even the people that we normally would say they're horrible. They might be. But I think let's take a breath and let's try to find some crack where we can let in the light, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So anyway, for those interested, it's thinkingispower.com. Huge fan of that website. So.
That's excellent. So thank you so much for that background. I do want to read a quick announcement, and I know we've got calls out the wazoo, and I know your time is valuable. So if it's okay with you, we'll jump over to some calls.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so as a reminder, before we take calls, the Atheist Experience is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. So, I'd like to jump straight into a call. We've got a lot of them. We're going to start off with Dee from Iowa. Now, Dee describes themselves, her pronouns are she, her. She describes herself as a former charismatic fundamentalist Christian struggling to leave foundational beliefs in the supernatural. And her question is, how did Seth make that transition? So, Dee, do you want to explain your background a little bit and ask Seth your question?
Yeah, thanks so much. I am really excited to engage with Seth. My first experience with you was your religion made me talk like an idiot, and I was hooked from that moment.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you for everything that you do. Thanks for taking my call. So, yeah, definitely, I think you can understand where I'm coming from, charismatic fundamentalists. The thing is my Christian background is an awful lot different from, I think, the typical theists that you might talk to on a daily basis. Most theists want to call in and convince you that their religion is happy and cotton candy and fluffy bunnies. My religious and spiritual experiences were very different, very negative. By the time I split with the particular church that I was going to, I was already considered something of an apostate by the church leadership. I was leading a Bible study that was not sanctioned by church leadership. I think you're probably familiar with Marcion of Sinope. His major theology was that basically the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament were two different gods.
Well,
and
rather than get into the details, because we have a lot of callers, I do appreciate that. Can you give us sort of that's no, quite all right. I understand. Can you give us a summary of those beliefs that you're struggling with abandoning? Like, what is it that what is the struggle you're currently dealing with?
So I appreciate and I sympathize the pure atheism, the pure atheist understanding of the world. I'm having a hard time letting go of a belief in supernatural things. I was speaking with the guys on Talkheathen earlier today and kind of expressing that. And when I saw Seth was on, I was really interested in how you actually ultimately made the transition away from believing in the supernatural, how you let that go, because religion in general, I think, is antithetical to humanism, to improving human life, to improving ourselves. But I've had so many experiences and such indoctrination over my past that I'm finding it hard to totally leave it behind.
Why don't we ask Seth then his take on that? I know we talked a little bit in our intro conversation. Seth, is there anything you'd like to expand on?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. First, I think that there are a lot of religious organizations and religious people who do humanistic work. Some of my allies, interfaith allies for state-church separation, are in fact Christians. Amanda Tyler with Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and sociologist Dr. Andrew Whitehead. He is a believer, but we are humanists. Now, granted, I think he has probably abridged the Christian faith quite a bit to be able to accommodate that. But hell, I'll take that, So I don't know. I think, again, when we say religion, it's an awfully complex thing. I'm guessing because you are ex-Pentecostal, yours was an experiential, highly emotionally, highly charged type of church. The Pentecostals, I think, also say that you can lose your salvation. I don't know. Is there any of that? Like, what if I'm wrong? Will I go to hell? Dee, do you have any of that going on?
I have mostly left behind the I'm going to hell thing. I mean, when I deconstructed out of Pentecostalism, I had a lot of this. God, don't read this. You're going to open yourself up to demonic influence. I'm past that, but I've kind of segued from organized religion experience to more,
sure, I'm tracking. Let me see if I can articulate this quickly. This is extremely common. And Graham, jump in anytime, my friend. Sure. But, somebody's in a fundamentalist faith, right? And they're like, the Bible is absolutely true. And then they hit a wall and they're like, well, that doesn't jive. Okay, the Bible's mostly true. Well, some of it was for yesterday, some was for today. Okay, some's metaphor, some's literal. Okay, I don't believe the Bible, but I love Jesus. It's a personal relationship. And then maybe there's not Jesus, but there's a God. And then maybe it's just maybe I'm spiritual. This is a common thing. You're actually moving away from fundamentalism. And you're in that zone where maybe there's something out there. I don't know everything. There are a lot of unexplained things. Is a spiritual membrane active in this world? Don't beat yourself up for that, and don't push yourself too far. Look, I will surprise you, Dee. I'm married to one of the smartest people that I know, and she calls herself spiritual. She does not doesn't really believe in anything fundamental about anything. But I mean, she's like, you know, was that a sign? You know, did that happen because of some sort of a supernatural thing? And it's interesting when people find out that an atheist activist is married to someone who identifies as spiritual. I don't dog her for that. We don't fight about that. It doesn't bother me. And I think, honestly, as long as you're not a hardcore fundamentalist trying to strip other people of who they are and what they do, I think continue to ask the question, what is it and how do I know it, right? Not what do I believe, what did I feel, what do I think I saw, but is it something that I can verify and that I can test and retest and we can actually sort of peer review? What are my criteria for deciding if it actually happened? Because we know that perception and reality are not necessarily the same things. But if you came out of fundy Pentecostalism and you've overcome the fear of damnation and hell, and those people, that culture, that religion, that dogma no longer has its clutches, its claws, its hooks in you, if you've escaped and come this far, honestly, I think you're doing just fine. And the spiritual stuff, honestly, if you find evidence for supernatural activity, ghosts, something along those lines, if you find some proof of that, you call us and we'll talk. In the meantime, give yourself a break. I think you're doing just fine, okay?
I would totally second that. That is almost exactly word for word what my answer would be, although maybe some of the words in the middle may have been different. But my question back to Dee at the end of this is this struggle causing you problems with your day-to-day life? Because people believe all sorts of things because it makes them feel better or that's how they were raised, but it doesn't mean that it's they're now giving 10% of their income to a church or that they feel guilty or that they're going to hell. So what's the harm? You know, if it's not making you be a bad person and it's not taking away from your life, is it okay to just sort of live with these beliefs of, oh, maybe something did create everything and maybe there is a nice thing afterwards? Does that help, Dee? Does that make you feel better?
It does, because I listen to Matt Dillahunty and Forrest a lot, and sometimes I wonder, you know, they're so hung up on, you know, give me the proof, show me, you know, and I'm kind of in that twilight area where I'm like, you know, be a rational being. And I'm studying, you know, argumented, you know, logic and arguments and fallacies and stuff. And
well, honestly, those are valid things. Like, how do we know what we know, right? Epistemology, the study of knowledge. How do we come to knowledge? And I think if you have a feeling and intuition, if you see a sign or whatever, I think your journey might be served by understanding how perception and reality may be very different. What I think I saw or felt or believe, you know, how would I vet that? How would I contrast that with someone who said that it wasn't this spirit, but it was that spirit? Understanding that the brain is an amazing machine, but it's tremendously flawed. Hell, you should see the studies that are done on human memories, where we think this happened. We're convinced it happened. I remember it was Elizabeth Loftus, who is an expert on memory, was part of an experiment for a show called Brain Games. And they staged a mugging in public, totally staged with actors. And then there were actual bystanders around, unsuspecting, right? And so they staged the mugging. Guy comes in and he's wearing a red jacket or something. I'm doing this from memory myself. And then he runs off with her purse. Oh my God, call the cops or whatever. And they take the witnesses all in and they interview them. And they say, describe the mugger. Oh, he was wearing a green jacket. Oh yeah, I know. No, it was a white jacket. I thought was he tall? Was he short? I think he had brown hair, mustache. I don't know. People's memories we're just not creatures that can always trust our minds. And understanding this machine of the mind and what we perceive to be spiritual, I think that's a helpful tool for the tool chest. Okay.
I took a high school psychology class, and the teacher set up just exactly that thing of, you know, somebody coming in and uh, stealing somebody's purse and rushing out, and then, the exact same thing. It describe him, describe what happened, describe his clothing. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I've never been a very woo-woo, credulous sort of person. That experience alone really primed me for the rest of my life to be critical in the things I experience. So
It
sounds like you're on your way.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're on your way, Dee.
Absolutely. I really want to thank Dee for calling in. I think if you need permission to continue to believe kind of supernatural things while you're exploring it, you have everybody's permission. You shouldn't feel guilty about it. It is, to some degree, very natural human condition. But I'm glad that you're thinking about it. I'm glad that you are pondering those sorts of issues. So thank you.
It's funny because I used to take a lot harder stand on that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sorry, you believe in spirits? And I mean, I get it. Like, on the cerebral level, we understand that it's spirits fall into the kind of in many ways, the same categories as gods, right? Mm-hmm. Put up or shut up, prove it or lose it, kind of a thing.
Right.
But I'm not threatened by somebody who thinks I'm spiritual, unless it's translating into, oh, I'm not going to get chemo for my cancer because I'm tuning my, mental tuning fork to the chakras, that kind of shit. But I mean, just somebody who thinks maybe there's something out there or whatever. I'm not threatened by that. I think those are conversations we can have. But I mean, it was refreshing to hear you say that, because we, years ago, especially in the movement, would have just destroyed Dee. Right. We would have come down. We would have hit her like a freaking thermonuclear bomb. And I'm so glad we've evolved past that here. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what I was trying to hint at the opening of the show, that when I watch your approach to things and some other key people, keep it positive, keep it realistic. And what really matters is where the rubber hits the road. That's sort of what I like to focus on. We can navel gaze all we want about whether every iota of belief you have is justified. And so what if it's not? The best argument you can say that should matter is to say, well, if you can become convinced of some mild beliefs on insufficient evidence, in this case, you might become convinced of some more severe beliefs or some more extreme beliefs later. And that's why we have these conversations with Dee. Dee is trying to avoid that. In my opinion, that's people become aware that, oh, okay, I want to make sure that I'm believing things based on sufficient evidence. But you have to let people come to it at their own speed. If they don't, as I cited at the beginning, we have study after study after study that shows you will dig in, you will become totally closed-minded, and you will perceive the person who is trying to convince you as, oh, that's their tribe and that's how they do things. They attack people rather than just understand people from where they're coming from. So I love
the same part of the brain activates, right? The amygdala fires up. The same part of the brain activates with an ideological threat that does with a physical threat. So if someone's coming after me with a knife, right, that fight or flight or freeze response kicks in. The same response happens when someone comes after a core identity belief that I take personally. I fight, flight, or freeze. And so I used to have this thing that where I walked into the room with data points, and I was like, well, let me show you this. It's in the Bible. And let me, Noah's Ark, it absolutely didn't happen. And how stupid is this story? We know that slavery is immoral and rape in the Bible. Blah, I mean, I just literally just laying it all out, thinking I have the data, I win. Mm-hmm. Did I change minds? Never. No, they always fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because I would set them back on their heels, and they were immediately in a defensive posture. We weren't engaging. People change their minds when they feel safe to do so. And I also have to allow for the fact that the person in a conversation that's wrong might be me. That's not popular among this idea that if I walk in and go, well, those poor slobs are wrong about everything. Good thing I'm here to enlighten them. But I think if we are to have intellectual humility, we have to walk into every exchange with an interlocutor with ears open and say, show me, Tell me what you know. How do you know it? Let's talk about those things. And if I find that I am wrong, right? Someone says this did not happen in the way that you say it happened. Here is the data, and I can verify it. And I find out I was wrong. I think the honest, what's that line? When an honest person realizes he is wrong, he will either cease to be wrong or he will cease to be honest.
Yes, yes.
And I think there's a lot to that. Anyway, I'll stop bloviating on the subject, but it's just so refreshing to hear that. So thanks, brother.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely. I like that you cited that experiment as well, the setting up a staged robbery. It's something I think just 2 weeks ago I was talking about my first experience with that on, I think it was Nightline did it. And in that particular case was really good because everybody swore. It was a classroom in a lecture hall, right? A professor was teaching this. And everybody swore that the robber, the guy that ran in and grabbed her purse, had something wrong with his nose. He had a broken nose. He had a big nose. He had a small nose. And then when they played the video back after the robber had left and they told students not to chase and the class was settling down and the professor was about to start lecturing again, she said by the podium near her mic in a small voice, she said, "Wow, that was a weird nose. Anyway, blah, 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 blah." And then they interview all the witnesses afterwards, and they all insist there's a problem with the nose. And then they show them the video of the professor suggesting it. And they didn't realize that they were prompted that way, to the point that one of the people that was a witness insisted, no. He still had a bad nose. So they brought the actor out, totally normal nose. And the guy got up, stood in front of him, was like, "No, see, it's slightly angled." He would not accept the fact that he had been influenced in such a way. It was at odds with, I can't be wrong. I've taken a position publicly. I've stated it, and I cannot back down even when I'm presented with overwhelming evidence in my face.
It's fascinating. It's just fascinating stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things we do on the show, Seth, if you've watched, is we have a question of the week. Last week, we asked our audience, what would Jesus Google? And I want to read off the 3 top voted answers by our commenters. Number 3 was Chuck Gatus, who, what would Jesus Google? Can I sue for wrongful death if I'm the deceased? That's a pretty good answer. Now, I can't give official legal advice here, but no, you can't because you're dead. But Jesus' estate could if he was practicing under American law. So Jesus really didn't have any children as far as we know, but if his parents were still alive, they could certainly have sued for wrongful death. The counter argument, of course, would be that the Romans would say, no, it wasn't wrongful. He was being punished. So there you go. Nothing like a lawyer to take the joy out of a joke. Secular felinist said Jesus would Google Chris Angel walking on water trick. Yep. I think that is exactly how they would try to. He's obviously trying to figure out how he would pull off walking on water. So that's a good one. And the number 1 answer, and it really is a good one, why did my skin turn white and my eyes turn blue? So yeah, that is a common trope you will hear. All the depictions of Jesus when I was growing up, I'm about maybe your age, I'm in my mid 50s. All of the depictions I was ever exposed to were blue-eyed, white skin, sort of the Euro version of a Middle Eastern man from 2,000 years ago.
You know, it's interesting, Graham. I did a video years ago called The Changing Face of Jesus. And it was an exploration into how cultures all over the world, their Jesuses look like them. Right. So there's an African-American Jesus with black skin. There is an Asian Jesus. There are Native American Jesuses. And so it's interesting how our gods seem to validate us. They look like us. They talk like us. They behave like us. I find that very interesting. And then here, of course, in a very, what has been obviously since our founding, a white dominant culture, where until just recently, I think we saw mostly just white people calling the shots. It was white Jesus that was the order of the day. So yeah, it's an interesting observation.
Somebody once said, the god of the ants is an ant. The god of the penguins is a penguin.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank Holger Lubotsky for putting in that one. Why did my skin turn white and eyes turn blue? We have a question this week, Seth. Maybe you can take a shot at it. The question of the week is, if there is an intelligent designer, explain blank. You want to try to fill in the blank there?
This is tailor-made for me. Forgive a very short version of a long story. I, earlier this year, finished narrating the audiobook for Dr. Abby Hafer, who is a human anatomy professor and a zoologist. And she's the author of a book called The Not So Intelligent Designer. And she goes through the book and she talks about how all the people who are like, oh, look at the trees and look at the birth of a baby boy and look how fine-tuned everything is. It could not have evolved via natural selection. It must be the product of the painter's brush kind of thing. And she goes through and just dismantles. And she's like, well, that's bad design. This is bad design. This is bad design. And so I use that as the inspiration for a speech that I have been giving. I just gave one in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada, just a few days ago. And it will release to YouTube, I think, early September. So it's coming. But we just go through, and not only do I say, well, this is crap, that doesn't make any sense, this is destructive, but then I provide suggestions as to how I would improve it. And so I don't know if I can give you just one answer on this, but I mean, we get everything in, like the appendix is the easy one, a tiny hand grenade of doom that has a little bacteria party that gets out of hand and explodes, and then you die in great pain. The birthing blueprint for humans, I think, is ridiculous, especially when we see in nature other creatures who've got a much better deal than we did. The fact that we have to live our lives, adult lives, for decades and decades on one set of adult teeth, when animals like sharks can rotate them out. So if they have no time to accumulate bacteria, if they chip one, it's gone, in 14, 20 days, it's, next, no problem. I mean, just one after the other. So I don't think I can give you just one answer. I think nipples on men. I have questions about nipples on men. I don't know. What do you think, Graham?
Well, I really liked the appendix being described, the little hand grenade of doom. I think that's the best answer. If there is intelligent designer, please explain the little hand grenade of doom. So
we look throughout nature, like we see blind creatures with eyes. Right. We see deaf creatures with ears. We see heavy bones and flying animals. We see whales that are ocean-bound and can drown. Why would you create an ocean-bound animal that can drown? This makes no design sense to me. So anyway, that speech is coming out next month.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, my question is always, why do you make animals who can only live by eating each other? Like, you could have easily avoided that. We see that with plants, and if you're controlling the physics of the universe, you didn't need to do that. It's like one of the most vicious instincts that is inherent in every species is this survivalist thing. And wow. Okay. But I'm eager to hear what our audience has to come up with on this answer. So to answer this question of the week, if there is an intelligent designer, please explain blank. Put your comments in the comments section, not in the Discord chat or anywhere else. And then next week we'll reveal our top 3. But I don't know if people are going to beat the hand grenade of doom. All right. I'm going to do an announcement, and then we'll see if we have time for another call, Seth, if you're up for it.
You betcha.
All right. So we're going to talk about the Bat Cruise. Tickets are unfortunately sold out for our annual Bat Cruise fundraiser. If you've bought your tickets, get ready for a great time with show hosts like Forrest Valkai, J. Mike, Secular Rarity, Objectively Dan, Christy Powell, the cross-examiner, some weird guy, Jimmy Jr., Kelly Laughlin, and many other familiar faces, including many of the people you've only seen in Crew Cam, which we will probably take a look at in a few seconds. If you haven't bought your tickets, you can get added to the wait list, and if anyone cancels, you'll have a first-come, first-served second chance to join in on the fun. Add your name to the wait list at tiny.cc/batcruise. We are 1 week away. Speaking of the crew cam, I wonder if we can get to take a look at the crew here. Do we have that shot ready? There they are. These are the pictures of our volunteers who help make this show happen every single week. Amazing people, and I want to thank them for all their efforts. Without them, none of this would be possible, and we couldn't have 2 people bloviating, as Seth likes to say, out here about these issues. So thank you very much.
They really are beautiful people, aren't they? You can't fake that.
Absolutely.
You got to be born with that. So
I think we should give them a 500% raise on the spot because 0 times 500% is 0. So that's it. Granted, 500% raise. They're all volunteers. Thank you very much. So finally, the ACA wants you to know what's going on in our community. And for that, we've got an updated website. Head to www.atheist-community.org, where you can learn about the organization itself, its policies, and how you can get involved. And you can also support us on Patreon. Giving to our Patreon ensures our ability to continue to produce the content you love. Visit tiny.cc/PatreonAXP. So thanks everybody for that. Let's jump into another call. I think what we will do is talk to Ben. We do have a theist caller on the line, at least one. Now, Ben here may be the person I've spoken with before, but Ben says, quote, I want to tell you why God has slavery in the Bible. So I am all ears. I'm sure Seth is all ears. Why does God have slavery in the Bible?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I called in last week, and Secularity told me to call back in about this because I usually try to defend slavery by using points like the economy and different things. I would say it was designed that way, I guess. So I was going to bring up the old version of the Garden of Eden, one of the versions that had humans as slaves. And then I was also going to bring up like kind of the older religions to compare to the Bible.
Well, let me ask you this before we get into that. Let's just set some baselines here. Do you think that slavery, were it practiced today, owning a person as another as property, excuse me, do you think that that is a morally good thing?
I don't think it's moral, no.
By not thinking it's moral, you think it's not good, right? It is something we ought not to do, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think? No. Let me ask another question, a sort of a measure, a level setting here. Do you think that if slavery was practiced, let's say, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, that back then it was a morally bad thing, that it was something they ought not have done back then?
Well, I think subjective morality depends on the time.
That wasn't my question. That wasn't my question. Hold on. Before we go down a path where you weren't answering my question, I just want to make sure you understood the question. Do you, Benjamin, believe that if somebody was practicing slavery 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, was that a bad thing? Should they not have done that? What do you think about that?
By today's standards, no.
What about if you were alive 2,000 years ago?
Well, if I was there back in those days, it would have been acceptable because back.
Would you have been correct to believe that it was acceptable back then?
If I'm going off the morals of that time, yeah.
Should you go off the morals of that time?
Well, if I'm in that time, and I would be going off the morals of that time, just like now in the present.
Right, but that's not my question. I'm gonna pull Seth in here a second but I just want to, like I said, level set before we get into the conversation. The question wasn't what you would do. My question is, should people be held to a standard of their time, or should we be able to look at different eras and say, if we had more information, we would know better? And even back then, it was wrong to own people as property. What are your thoughts there before we hand it off to Seth?
I guess both. I guess on one hand, you can look at it as it depends on the time that you're in. And on the other hand, you could also say, well, since it's wrong now, it was wrong then. So I guess
I think that's actually, I'm going to applaud that. You can. Those are the options. Those are two valid arguments to make. So I'd love to hear Seth's opinion on this. So we've got a situation where basically the discussion, it could be about anything, slavery or anything else, that my vision of morality is probably similar to a lot of other people's in this space where the more we know about how to make life better for people, the more we can realize what a good action and a bad action is. And so the question comes along, was it morally wrong, I guess, in the year 0 or -500 to practice slavery? What are your thoughts on that, Seth? I think it's a more complicated question than some people make it out to be.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I can add too much to what you've already said, because it was well said. I will, of the 13 audiobooks that I have narrated, one of them is by Assyriologist and Old Testament scholar, Dr. Joshua Bowen. And the book is called Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? Mm-hmm. And it verifies that we are not talking about indentured servitude, right? Not debt slavery. There were debt slaves. But what we're talking about today did exist, chattel slavery, human beings as property, so much so that they could be essentially used and abused. Their offspring would be owned by the masters. If they married, the spouses would be owned by the masters. They were bought and sold as goods, those types of things. But one of the great points that Dr. Joshua Bowen makes is that the slavery apologetics lean into the concept God couldn't.
Correct.
So
correct.
God had to condescend to this more primitive time in human history. He had to use the model that was in place because that was what was going on. Rather than come in, he couldn't just change everything. They already had slaves. So if he was going to come in and he was going to give his commands and move his chess pieces around the board, and he was going to instruct his people, blah, 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 he was simply using the societal rules and norms that existed at the time. And I just resist this God couldn't approach, because if God is all powerful, God can do anything, then God could have eliminated or prevented slavery outright and said, okay, I'm handing you a new model. Here's a model for living. Here's a structure for society. Here's how your economy can work. Here's how your families can be organized. Here's how communities will operate. And there is no slavery involved. Please start using this. And he could have done that at any time. So I just resist this notion that, well, back then it was normal and it was what everybody did. It was a more primitive time and God had to condescend and use what was in place. I don't think that God would have had any limits. So I don't think that serves as an excuse.
I couldn't agree more. I wanted to thank Benjamin for that call. It reminds me, Ben Shapiro. I'm sorry. It reminds me that.
Sorry, I just threw up in my mouth a little bit. Sorry. Anytime I hear Ben Shapiro's name, I had to choke it down. Sorry.
My computer did something the minute I said Ben Shapiro, which is why I looked confused for a second. So even my computer, I think, was. Yeah. So he ended up in a debate with Alex O'Connor, who's this young up and coming, quick-witted atheist, and it went to this point of, okay, if the scriptures are a good thing, then explain why slavery is permissible. And Ben gave the answer you're talking about. God couldn't because of this, that, and the other thing. And I remember watching, I think it was the Majority Report or somebody like that, Sam Sider. Somebody went, "Oh, so God's a gradualist. God's subtle. He's a politician. He needs approval." Like, we have very definitive laws on thou shalt not kill and don't wear clothing of mixed fabric. That's like immediately that we can rule out immediately. Shellfish, right out. Robbing, right out. The whole rape thing, right out, as long as, you pay your shekels to the father of the virgin daughter. But slavery, for some reason, we have to be a gradualist, because I think you might agree that's the only argument they've got, is to make up a narrative in which, well, God knew it was wrong, but he's a gradualist or he's a politician or something.
Yeah. It's either that or indentured. It's all indentured servitude, which means they simply have not read Exodus and Leviticus and even parts of the New Testament. And, it's funny. This week, I am releasing a podcast around 2 of atheist Bible trivia on my show, because obviously if you want someone who knows the Bible, you probably want to ask an atheist, because we are usually statistically more Bible literate than those who say that it's absolutely true. But I go through and I tell some of these wackier stories about the stuff in the Bible that apologists get squirmy about, but that we find revealing, sometimes entertaining, often shocking. It'll drop on Tuesday, but it's Atheist Bible Trivia. It'll be on the thinkingatheist.com website. And we get into stuff like that, what about this slave? And what about this, this woman who intervened in her husband's fight? What was her punishment when they showed her no pity? And we get into a lot of that stuff that really does, it's off the radar of mainstream Christianity. Have you seen the video, Graham, of the Quran Bible challenge?
No.
I do a version of this with the Bible. Forgive the digression.
Mm-hmm.
But these guys, and they're Muslims, right? They took a Bible and they put a Quran cover on it, a slip cover on it that said the Holy Quran. And they go out to people in the street and they started quoting verses from the Bible, including slavery verses, right? Beating your slaves until they're unconscious. And then if they get up within 2 days, you're off the hook. And what about marrying your rapist after paying off the father, and the genocide of 500,000 people in one battle? And people were horrified. That's barbaric. Who could believe such nonsense? What century is this? Oh, it's terrible. And then these guys go, and they took the cover off and showed that they were actually offended by the Bible. And you could hear their brain cells go literally boom. And then the
context argument started, right? Like, oh, well, you didn't read the,
It didn't show anything in that video beyond just their mind-blown reaction. It's my hope that a seed was kind of planted.
Right.
Dr. Loftus, or John Loftus, talks about the outsider test for faith, right? With the fact that we scrutinize and criticize other religions, out-group religions, while protecting our own. And I think that's a great example, right? Because if it was the Quran, they didn't even vet it. They didn't even say, well, what's your source? Well, who wrote that? Well, what verse, what chapter? How do I know? What did the other experts say? None of that was in place. They immediately said, that's barbaric and horrifying.
Right.
But when it came to the Bible, I would have guessed that all of a sudden, all of these excuses kicked in. It's really fast. I think it's on YouTube. I think it's called the Quran Bible Challenge, something like that.
That's excellent. It reminds me of Julia Sweeney from Saturday Night Live did a video years ago called Letting Go of God. And she talks in the beginning of a pair of Mormon missionaries came to her door and explained to her the whole deal, right? The planets and all of that. And she thought, that is the weirdest thing I ever heard of. And then to her credit, she said, well, wait a second. I'm a Catholic. I believe that this cracker turns into the literal body of Jesus, and I believe all of these other weird things. And it was, as much as she's writing her own story, right? But I mean, she did come out of her faith because of this encounter. So even being exposed to other people's weird beliefs is, if you take one moment to say, would I find the same criticism of my own beliefs, like we were talking about at the top of the show, it might at least moderate your views. That's always my goal. I'm not here to talk people out of believing in their faith if it gives them comfort, but let's not strap bombs to our chests. Like, let's not try to take over the country. Let's not murder in the name of the voice that I think I hear, that I think created the universe. Like, if we can moderate views, well, then we can start talking. So that being able to apply the same skepticism to every claim, even your own, is an important tool. I think it's past your time. Is it past your bedtime? Do you have time for another call? Or?
No, I'm actually good. I'm good till about 6:30. So I'm good.
Okay. Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, you're not on the clock for me, brother. I'm good.
I'm so, I know your time's important, and you just were traveling. So
I'm easy.
All right. Well, why don't we jump into another call then? We're going to talk to, let me see if I can find it here. We're going to talk to Steve from Nebraska. Steve wants to talk about, quote, messages scientists have found in DNA and related, and then it cuts off, so related stuff, I assume. So, Steve, before we get into that, I have one question, and that is, can you please define the word message?
Well, the message is an informational signal embedded in genetic code. But what I was calling to discuss was, by the way.
Hold on a second there, Steve. Just real quick, I think this is really important. Informational signal embedded in code. So we've raised a bunch of issues here. I want to make sure we're not sneaking in any presumptions. I want to make sure we're talking plainly to one another. So a signal, if I'm understanding you correctly, would come from a mind and goes to a mind. Is that what you're saying? That this message came from a mind somewhere?
The signal was found by a couple of scientists, namely Vladimir Sherbak and Maxim Makokov. And how the scientists found this genetically coded message is based on the fact that 8 of the conical amino acids can be sufficiently defined by the composition of their codons first and second base nucleotides.
Okay, so here's my question then. Seth and I'm making a presumption. I realize I'm assuming something. Seth, are you an expert in DNA?
I am not, sir.
I am not. Are you a biologist?
I am not.
I am not. Is this the Biologist Experience show? I don't think so. So the reason I'm bringing this up, Steve, is you did not answer my question. I asked you if when you say message or signal, you meant, is it a communication coming from a mind, that a mind originated it? And you just told me who discovered it, and then you wanted to start talking about amino acids.
Who allegedly discovered it.
Allegedly discovered it, right.
You're the attorney. You're the attorney, and I caught that. I'm so proud of myself, Graham. I'm so proud of me.
So, Steve, I want to back up because, as I hope you've heard as we've been talking, Seth and I are fairly laid back. We want to have an actual conversation where we can define terms and make sure we're on the same page before we can even try to explain things. But I also want to set expectations because we don't have biology degrees. We aren't experts in DNA. I'm sure there are shows and journals that you could approach with these sorts of findings. So can we back up and could you answer my original question, please? When you say it is a message or a signal, do you mean that it is coming from a mind, that a mind originated this signal?
It's coming from, it's concluded that the signal is coming from extraterrestrial intelligence that invented the genetic code.
That's very interesting to me. I assume. Why don't you give us, let's say, in a minute, your best summary of that claim that there is some sort of evidence that you apparently I don't even know that you supposedly think has some validity, that there is an extraterrestrial source to some sort of message that is embedded in, I assume, not just human DNA but maybe all DNA. Why don't you spend like 60 seconds telling us your best elevator pitch for that view?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. So, as I was mentioning, the scientists, how they found, I'll describe the process, how they unlocked this message, exactly what the message is. Please, thank you. So the scientists found this message by, they base this on the fact that 8 of the conical amino acids can be sufficiently defined by the composition of their codons first and second base nucleotides.
You're losing me, Steve.
Probably one of these amino acids. Go ahead.
You're losing me because I don't know what canonical DNA amino acids on their whatever it is that you were just saying. So I just wanted to let you know I don't understand what you're talking about already. So can you dumb it down for me and give me, you're giving a sales pitch to somebody on the street. Why should I buy the book or something? What is it all about?
Okay, so based on the grouping of amino acids, they found that if you sum the amino acids nucleons or atomic mass, that the side chain amounted to 333, 37 times 3 squared. The sum of their total nucleon core structure is 592, 37 times 4 squared, and the sum of their total nucleons is 925, 37 times 5 squared. And factoring out 37, it results in 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared, representative of an Egyptian triangle. And the reconfigured proline, having a standardized chord structure at 74 nucleons, has no natural occurring function. And but it may serve as a decoder, initializing with 37 being a common divisor, the formulation of a recognizable mathematical pattern conveying the message of an Egyptian triangle embedded in our genetic code.
Got it. Okay. So, Seth, you're the expert, as you said earlier, that you should handle this question, I think.
I need to apparently adjust my dish. Oh, wait a minute. My receiver is not, I don't know. All of this is abstract to the point. I mean, I guess it's somewhat interesting, but what would be the purpose? What extraterrestrial agent would code in some kind of a receiver, right? There would be a signal, which meant I was a signal that I was supposed to receive. Otherwise, it would have no purpose. And yet we didn't unlock our genome until 2003, which meant that 100 to 200,000 years of human beings in their present form would have no idea it was there. And even now, no actual scientists beyond the two people that he's referred to that I've never heard of, who may not be scientists, apparently have made a claim about it. There's just not much I can do with this call, Steve. So I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I honestly think that we're going to need more. Probably we're going to need the scientific community to rally around this revelation of a signal that is being received, how to translate it, what it means, what its purpose is. And if I start hearing things between my ears, I will let you know. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. Thank you, Steve. We'll let you go here. We're not the people to talk to, but I did hear hints of numerology and Bible code and all of that stuff. And it reminds me, you mentioned Feynman earlier. It reminds me of one of my favorite Feynman quotes, who comes into a lecture and says, "On my way to the lecture, I saw a car with a license plate ARW 357. Can you imagine, of all the millions of license plates in New York, I saw that one? What are the odds?" Sometimes numbers are just numbers, Steve. Sometimes you can find patterns in things and then say, look, that's interesting. But it doesn't mean aliens did anything. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but what I would like to recommend, Steve, in all seriousness, is there is a show that the ACA puts on called Talk Heathen. There's another one that's Truth Wanted, but Truth Wanted would probably be right up your alley. I don't know if you've called before, but they might have some experts. You might want to wait till you have some experts in that field on the show, or better yet, the closing question I always have to these sorts of calls is, okay, so where is their Nobel Prize, right? Where, these scientists discovered that there was a signal from the alien species, something about an Egyptian pyramid or an Egyptian triangle. Where is their Nobel Prize? And
honestly, I wish that Dan Wilson, I think he's a microbiologist, Dr. Wilson from the Debunk the Funk podcast, was here, or maybe Dave Farina, somebody who could get him, because I'm sure they would be all over this, and you and I would just sit back with popcorn and just kind of watch what happened next.
Exactly.
But that's not really my wheelhouse, but it's a good point. Like, where's your Nobel Prize? Where is the world changing scientific alteration of course that has taken place over this revelation? And actually, no one's heard of it, and I think that's problematic. So yes,
and the next step, and we talked earlier, maybe pre-show, about sort of this denialism. You mentioned germ denialism, right?
Yeah.
At its core, every denialism is a conspiracy theory. It has to be, because the conspiracy would go, hey, we've got evidence that there's alien signals about Egyptian triangles in DNA. And then we say, well, where's your Nobel Prize? Because we would open a department of alien DNA studies at every university. You would win a Nobel Prize. You would be the Time Man of the Year. Yep. And then you have to add, they inevitably will add, and I'm not saying Steve would do this, maybe Steve would do this. Oh, well, nobody, they're being kept out by the establishment. Nobody will publish the paper. It's a conspiracy against the truth. And that's how you get to these QAnon, flat earth, germ denying, moon landing, 9/11, election, Egyptian triangle conspiracies.
Which is a misunderstanding of how the scientific community works, right? It's like scientists get famous by proving other scientists wrong.
Yep.
Right. I mean, the whole process of science is trying to disprove a hypothesis. And so this idea that they all got together, they're all on the same page and got together in a big star chamber down in somebody's basement and agreed on the cover up, to me is bizarre. And it's certainly not how science works. I remember growing up, somebody had a conspiracy like they've invented a car that runs on tap water, but big fossil fuels refuse to let it out. And they've paid off all the scientists. Someone actually had that opinion. And I thought, all you would need is one good whistleblower and a video camera to blow that thing out of the water, and we're driving water cars. Right. And yet it never happened. I find that suspicious.
And then there's the alternative, which is if you're Exxon, you already have the infrastructure to say, oh, you've invented the water fuel thing, or your Ford or Honda or whatever. I'm going to make you 100 millionaire or a billionaire for rights to this, and I will become a trillionaire because I've got the distribution and I've got the manufacturing. I mean, the profit motive on both actually doing the thing, like we have Dr. Ben as our backup host tonight, and he's listening. I'm sure the profit motive on curing cancer so far outweighs the profit motive of selling you gummy herb supplements that it's ridiculous at its core. Yeah. And if you've ever been a project manager, your case is also true. The profit motive of writing one tell-all book, because once you go public, you're not going to get assassinated too much. See, for example, the Boeing conspiracy theory people. The profit motive of writing that one book is life-changing money. And if you try to manage a project of any size, you can't keep anybody on task for the smallest amount of time. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. I do suggest call into the podcast that Seth suggested. Could you say it again, Seth?
I don't know. Does he produces, it's Debunk the Funk, and it's a YouTube page with Dr. Dan Wilson, who is a whip smart microbiologist. And I know Dave Farina does a lot of biology education, usually for college students. But I mean, there are people out there much more qualified than me to talk about the receivers that are wired into our genetic code. So sorry about that.
No, that's great. Excellent. Yeah, call into those people. It always confuses me when you're not calling on. The physics claims are not calling on to the physics shows, and the biology claims are not calling to biology shows. So I do have some super chats. I've been negligent. I apologize. We've had such a good conversation and some great calls. We have more calls. If you're on the line, we're going to answer you. I do have to read some super chats. These are people who have done a super chat in the YouTube live stream, and I'm going to read them out. So Jonathan France donated $4.99 and said the following. I'm not sure what it means, so Seth, I'm going to need your help interpreting this. Cross-examiner and Seth Andrews? More like boss's handler and Seth rams through. Bad arguments. I'm very witty. Everyone laugh collectively and individually. So I think he's trying to make puns of our names. Seth, you are now Seth rams through bad arguments.
I don't, I need apparently someone to attune my genetic receiver to properly understand what it is that he is or she is trying to say.
Yeah,
but
it's not in a 3-4-5 ratio.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think.
Rainbow Wolf for $9.99 said, on average, a secular humanist society is more scientifically literate, has a longer life expectancy, less poverty, less homelessness, etc. Religious societies equals less scientific literacy, less life expectancy, more poverty, and more homelessness. And this is actually, thank you very much for the generous donation, $10, a lot of money. This is an issue that's sort of near and dear to my heart. I'm actually working on a book right now to discuss this. The working title is Galileo Shrugged, and you take the Atlas Shrugged premise of all the industrialists leave society, but you say, what if all the scientists, what if all the atheists left America? What would America look like? What can we tell from studies? What can we tell by looking at other countries? What can we look at divisions in the United States? I don't know if you've experienced it, Seth, but when I look at the studies and the science, we see that in areas of the United States with high religiosity, we do see high divorce rates, high addiction rates, high teen pregnancy rates, high STDs, higher suicide rates, higher addiction. I may have already said that. Now, I can't say there's which way the causation arrow flows, because I want to be intellectually honest. I need more studies. It could be that, oh, it was always really crappy in these areas, so religion flourished as a coping mechanism, or religion flourished, and as a result, they shut down funding, they taught only abstinence, sex ed, and all of that stuff, and they created a higher rate of social ills. Have you pondered that or talked to anybody about that phenomenon?
It's funny. It's not really an either or either. You bring attention to what my friend Catherine Stewart calls the knowledge economy. There are just some cultures, they may be highly religious cultures that simply they're just catching up. And maybe they're well behind in the knowledge economy. But you're right. I'm in the Bible Belt, right? I'm in Oklahoma, USA. We call it's the meth belt and the alcoholism belt and the porn belt and all these other things that people are always warning against it. But the statistics do tend to bear out that more secular societies actually have a higher overall quality of life index. I wrote a chapter in my book, Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian, about the "we are number one" crowd who say that America's number one. We're the greatest, And so I actually went back and I'm like, well, what are the metrics on that? Because that's an emotional claim. Talk about a tribal, an identity belief, right? America, I'm free American. But that is something we branded onto our minds and hearts without really saying, well, how would I measure it? So I go into cost of living, quality of health care, crime rate, murder rate, domestic violence, lifespan, all of these other metrics. And we just get our ass kicked by much of the rest of the world. Many of those countries are more secular than we are. The only thing we came in first in was military spending and national pride, which means that we are number one at saying we are number one. I find that fascinating. But there's some interesting data about those who are less religious. I think they may, as a culture, become more focused on humans solving problems by humans for humans. There may be some merit to that for sure.
Absolutely. I'm eager to find out more about that. So watch out. I'll be ranting about that for years, I'm sure. Thomas Gallipoli gave $4.99 and has a message for Seth. Seth, you went to Canada for a Skeptic Con recently, and you recorded a video for Tommy, and that was for me. Thank you, Seth. You made my day.
You are most welcome. Yeah, I think Tommy wasn't able to make the event, and so Tommy's friend or spouse, someone was there. Forgive me for not remembering. It was a whirlwind of a weekend, and I said, "Well, pull out your phone." And I just did like a video greeting and said, "Hey, we missed you, and thanks for watching and listening." So I appreciate the kind words. It's a fun point of connection that the digital world allows. So you're most welcome.
It really is. Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm a board gamer is my hobby. So the only conferences I've been to so far are board game conferences. But that chance to meet people you only know online and just have a moment to chat with them is very rewarding. So thank you for that note, Thomas. Thank you for your donation. Quantum Answer, who has been a member for 2 years, gifted 10 the Atheist Experience memberships. So thank you very much. There was no message there, but thank you, Quantum Answer. And Kelly Laughlin, one of the stalwarts of the atheist community of Austin. He's been a member for 2 years, and he runs our Discord after show discussions. He's a frequent backup host. He's a host. Great guy. He gifted 5 the Atheist Experience memberships. He will also be, if I did not mention it earlier, at the Bat Cruise. Thank you so much, Kelly. Looking forward to seeing the new blazer you bought for the Bat Cruise day, or at least when we're in the studio. So thank you. Joan Lonsdale, a member for a year, donated £5 British. I love the contrast between the hosts. I don't mean their views. I mean their skin tones. 100%.
Yeah.
One of the biggest comments I get on all of my videos are, man, you're white.
Well, it doesn't help that I played tennis 4 times a week, and I played midday today in a freaking 100 degrees. And so even though I sunscreen, I always come back pink. And so I look like an Oompa Loompa. So that makes the contrast even worse. Sorry about that. So.
Yep. As Weird Al would say, I am whiter than sour cream. So I'll own it. Thank you very much for the 5 British pounds. Shane Heinzman donated $10. Compassion and empathy. Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. Daniel Schauer, a member for 6 months, donated $1.99. And he said, I believe, he said he loves the 60-second timer. Yes, I do too. If you can't give me an elevator pitch on the high level, we're probably not going to be able to have a good conversation that would be interesting to our viewers and carry us through. So thank you very much, Daniel. Miranda Rensberger, a frequent donator, gave $5. She's been a member for 6 months. What do we care about multiples of 37? Everyone knows the answer is 42. That is 100% correct. I wish I would have thought of that. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Thank you, Miranda. And then Ryan, $5 donation. Shopping at Target today and couldn't buy alcohol until 1 p.m. Reminder of how beliefs inform voting and change your life, etc. That is an excellent discussion. Your beliefs and those around you do inform collective action decisions, right? We're a 501c3. I can't get into talking about parties and things like that, but we can talk about issues. And one of those issues may very well be blue laws. What you're talking about is called a blue law. That's a holdover from religious beliefs that we're going to hold some holy day to be very shut down. We're going to shut down businesses. You can't buy alcohol. We're going to close certain establishments. And of course, in this country, it was always the Christian holy day, which has got its own built-in bias. So,
it's funny, Graham, after 14 years of broadcasts, I've got a show for everything. We did a whole show on blue laws. I think it's been a year or two where we went through, a lot of the stuff that's on the books that no one pays any attention to. Whatever, you can't have an ice cream cone in your pocket on a Sunday or something stupid like that. But there are a lot of really Puritan laws that are like that. They bizarre that they just make no sense. It just tells you how repression cultures approach the world we live in. In Oklahoma, I think one of them was, okay, well, if you have a nude bar with dancers, if they're totally nude, you can't serve alcohol there. But if you if they have a bottom on, then you can serve booze. But in Oklahoma, they have to put transparent pasties over the nipple. So you can still see the nipple, but it's a transparent. I was reading about it going, like, who comes up with that? Like, what sort of weird moral acrobatic was taking place to come up with the blue laws? Anyway, that's in the archive. Just search Thinking Atheist Blue Laws. I think it'll pop up. It's pretty fascinating to see these morality statutes throughout our history.
Excellent. There's a blog called Lowering the Bar. It's a legal humor written by a guy named Kevin Underhill. Very funny. Highly recommend people just follow Lowering the Bar. Great writing, great stories. He wrote a book called The Emergency Sasquatch Ordinance. It's exactly about what you're talking about. Like these are all real laws. And he goes back to pre-Jesus times. He goes back to the earliest laws and finds all of these weird things. Throughout history, there's these weird laws about morality and codifying it. When you actually read it, you're like, this is a history lesson as well as incredibly entertaining. So I suggest you check out the Emergency Sasquatch Ordinance because it's a banger. Quantum Answer, member for 2 years, gifted 10 more the Atheist Experience memberships. Thank you so much. This lets people enjoy the benefits of membership on your behalf. So thank you so much. And one final one so we can catch up. Buddy Bouncer, new member, $9.01. Much love to the entirety of the crew, hosts, and support. I look forward to the after show tonight. Thank you so much, Buddy Bouncer, and everyone who donated. It is like I said, the people who run this organization are, for the vast majority of them, volunteers. They got a very small staff, and they make a lot of good things happen in the world. So your donations are really appreciated. Shall we take another call, Seth?
I'm all yours. Sure.
Okay, so we've got Derek from, I think it's Canada. I don't have a specific province. And he says, as an atheist looking for advice, his wife has dementia, and she believes when he is talking to her that he is God, that Derek, is God. He comforts her with not going to hell, but then her sister and family tell her that is not true. So, Derek, my heart is already going out to you. This is one of the worst things in my mind that a person can go through, is to lose somebody in this way, to have this dementia set in, and you can slowly have that take effect. It's already enough of a struggle. It sounds like you're having trouble with the sister and the family as well. So could you give us where you stand right now with this situation?
Absolutely. I would like to clarify that my wife does not believe that I personally am God, but she believes that God is consistently speaking to her, and especially when she's in her lower points, she believes that God is directly telling her, you are going to hell. You are going to suffer. I know this is not biblically consistent. You're going to suffer 1,000 lifetimes of punishment, and then you are going to hell forever. And being that she was part of a Roman Catholic family, and that even her sister, my mother, are a bit religious, I've found myself telling her, to match kind of what the family is saying, is that, God is a forgiving God. He would not send you to hell. And I feel so internally inconsistent and confused, because I'm using my knowledge of the Bible, which I have always used to essentially discredit it, to try to make my wife feel better that the God that she believes does exist in her delusions would not send her to the hell she is so afraid of. Right. I know that I cannot approach this from a rationalist position. I cannot approach this using logic, because dementia doesn't work that way. But as much as I believe that, God, one, does not, the Christian God does not exist. I'll extend that far. I won't say no gods exist, the 99%. But as much as I do not believe that the Christian God exists, and even if he did, that he is, again, still a monster, I'm finding myself telling my wife, don't worry, God wouldn't send you to hell. Jesus came to forgive all your sins. You're going to be okay. That's why Jesus came and died for you.
Right.
I feel a bit icky internally saying that.
Understood. So, I have a question before I think we get into talking about it, because in your note there was something about your sister and your sister's family either contradicting you or telling you they're not true. Could you just spend a few seconds telling us where that tension is? What is their stance, that you shouldn't be saying this, or they are telling her, I don't think this is true, you are going to hell? I don't think that's what's going on. So what is the tension there?
I believe that was a miscommunication with the screener, because I'm essentially agreeing with her family. Her family is also telling her that God is not going to send you to hell. And I know that they absolutely would not like it if I, brought up my atheist beliefs, but I don't think this is an appropriate time to dig into my atheist beliefs. I believe that generally it's better to go with the flow, because it is an irrational terror.
I think you're a wonderful person. I just want to put that out here. Okay. I want to get Seth's opinion. I want to just mention real quickly, if you've ever seen the movie by Ricky Gervais called The Invention of Lying, it's a story by a famous atheist, Ricky Gervais, about a man who, I believe it was his mother, is terminally ill, and he's at her deathbed, and he's having this conversation with her. But he lives in a world, the framework of the movie is there is no such thing as lying. It is just physically impossible for anybody to lie. And they spend 10 minutes at the beginning of the movie to sort of set up what that world would look like. Like the advertising is a bus goes by with an ad on it that says Pepsi for when there's no Coke. Like that's the world he lives in. There's no lying. But he has some sort of genetic mutation that at that moment he can lie. And he says, don't worry, there's a life after this one. You're going to go to a place where you're happy. And she instantly believes him, because if you live in a world where everybody always tells the truth, then somebody says something and you know it's physically impossible for them to say otherwise, other than the truth, then them saying it means it's true. And then doctors and nurses hear from them, and it blows up into the rest of the movie, which is he becomes a leader of a religion and a cult, and everybody believes that this is all really true, and he's trying to deal with that. But I think its metaphoric message is, when you have these conversations that you're dealing with, you can feel this guilt, like, oh, am I opening this can of worms? Am I doing something bad that's going to cause some problems? No, you are not. You are being kind to your wife or your mother or your sibling or whoever you're dealing with, and you're being a good person. What are your thoughts on this one, Seth?
Yeah, and this is another one where there are some who will torch me for this, but the idea that if you are in the company of someone who has dementia or is going through a crisis as they enter the winter of their life, I mean, they're at a point where they're really looking at it. We have to ask ourselves, do I want to be a humanist, or do I want to be so married to throwing data out that I am sacrificing the humanity in our relationship? What's the compassionate thing to do, right? I have had this conversation in my own life. Let's say that, and I don't know if I know the answer to this, but I'll just tell, this is a personal story that maybe will help. If my mother was on her deathbed, right, and I showed up at the hospital and she was traumatized in the last hours of her life that I was going to go to hell, would I play act that I was going to accept Jesus to give her physical peace? To try to mitigate the panic before she drew her last breath? What would that cost me? Would that be a negation or sacrifice or betrayal of my integrity? Well, maybe if I did it on the world stage, maybe if if in a certain context, but if it was just us in a room, that might be considered a compassionate act, a way to eliminate suffering, to minimize harm. And so I tend to lean a little more in the direction of if she's got dementia and it helps to, if you're not going to have any purchase with logic when it comes to the God arguments, play in that sandbox, because it's the compassionate thing to do, and continue to reiterate the words of love and honor and compassion, and heaven is waiting. And some people will crucify me for this, but I swear, I mean, if it doesn't really matter, if you know that they're not cognitively going there, what's the compassionate thing to do? You are loved, and it's going to be fine, and there's no danger, and God may be waiting for you somewhere. And that heaven, if it exists, would be a lovely place. And if it does exist, save me a place, right? I mean, I don't think that's even dishonest. It's they're using if and what if and I think and if it exists, it's all good, blah, blah, blah. I would use that type of language. I think that's the humanist thing to do, but it's an imperfect answer. Graham, you see the minefield that I'm navigating right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I've run into the same minefield. I can remember a lot of people, when they come out of their religious beliefs or they discover certain things, they go through an angry atheist phase, right? I was never raised very religious, but I also was ignorant of the claims. I just saw that everybody around me believed all these things. And then I started reading the Bible and realizing, wow, I always thought there was some secret information in there that they had access to that established these facts. And then when I found it was nothing, I got very frustrated, and I would have been in that space of, well, no, you need to tell everybody that this is fake and blah, 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 blah. I have spent the last 30 years moderating my views to be to the point of pick and choose your battles, right? pick and choose where you decide to do that. If you're talking to somebody who's tempted to go out and vote the way you don't agree with, or to go out and blow something up, or to go out and give money to a shady organization based on insubstantiated evidence or evidence that you can contradict, that's where you want to fight your battle. But a relative who is going through dementia or other issues, they're not going to be even getting out of bed to vote, much less becoming some sort of extremist because you're telling them that they should feel better about their beliefs, that they might be true or that they are true, and that you will see them after they pass away. So where do you stand on this, Derek? Have you got any plans of how you're going to proceed? Does this help you sort of feel better about where you are?
It does help me feel a bit better, and I absolutely agree with the changing of how hard you have to look at the position, because back in my university days when, I was literally, I bought God Is Not Great as soon as it came out. And back then I was so much more, again, kind of that angry phase where nothing would ever get me to say anything remotely like God is real, anything along those lines. But in this sense, I had to ask myself, what's more important, feeling internally like a hypocrite, or comforting my wife when she is the lowest she's ever been? And I chose comforting my wife when she's the lowest she's ever been, and using the knowledge that I've always used to go against religion to at least help comfort her along with the rest of our family. Again, I don't think it was the wrong thing to do, but I do like how you've helped to position it in some ways. Like, if there's a heaven, please save a spot for me. And that will probably work more when she's on the manic side, where she's actually claiming she is a god.
Yep.
Again, we cannot really bring logic into it, but when she's down, and when she's saying God is telling me all night that I'm going to hell, I've really only been able to think the only thing I could say is God would not do that.
Yeah.
And I know it's not true, but if it's comforting, I'll say it.
Well, I'm not sure that's not true. To pull out my lawyering for you, God would not do that can be a true claim if what you mean by God is the character in the Bible of the New Testament who is asking you to believe in them in order to go to an afterlife. There's many faith traditions who would say, yes, God would not send you to hell as you exist now, because I know you and you're a good person and you have sought salvation and all of those sorts of things. So if that helps you feel better, there you go. I know that yeah, exactly. I know Seth had something to add as well.
No. Well, I mean, the New Testament does have "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into a lake of everlasting fire." But I'm reminded of that Roger Ebert documentary, the famous movie critic, and he got cancer and he eventually died. And he and his wife, I got the vibe he was an atheist, but their line that they had was apparently one of their favorite places in life was a strawberry field somewhere, a garden somewhere. And so they told each other, whoever goes first, I'll meet you at the strawberries. And I just like the sentiment of that. If there's a place, it's going to be good. I have every confidence it's going to be awesome. And you just save me a spot and we'll be there. And there won't be all the horrible stuff. And a worthy God would never damn you to hell. A worthy God would never make hell. It's going to be okay. The words of comfort that can be phrased without betraying your own values do exist. It's a little bit tricky out there, but my heart goes out to you. Big hugs to you and your family. You keep kicking, okay?
100%. Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate your call. And if you have any update reports to give us in the future, please do call back. I'm reminded a little bit of the late 90s movie Life is Beautiful about about the man who's in a World War II situation in Italy, and he's got this daughter, and the Nazis are coming, and he is trying to comfort her, and he just pretends like they're on this big adventure, while all along we, as the audience, see that they're running for their lives from the Nazis. You wouldn't say that that person was doing an immoral thing by keeping the child happy and calm and entertaining them. I think there's lots of situations where what we would call white lies are the right thing to do.
Yeah, and then again, we're going to get email because we are supposed to be creatures of the data and rooted in the facts. And I get it. I mean, on the surface level, Graham, I get it. But, it's not enough just to be right. I think we also need to be human beings, and it's situational, case by case. And I'm convinced there are instances when we can mitigate our language, or in a way that doesn't betray who we are, do a compassionate thing that might not be overt activism about what we think is true and what is not. And it's slippery, and it's weird, and it's imperfect, and it's sometimes problematic, and that's just life, right? Mm-hmm. That's life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you see lots of discussions on atheism talk groups or subreddits and things like that, where like the smallest little calls, the decisions about how to interact socially are called into question. I'm going to be going out to dinner with my religious family and they are going to pray. I don't feel like I should participate. What should I do? Type of calls. And I know there's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of things you could do in those situations. You could actively say, well, I'm leaving while you do this, like disrupt the social environment for some sort of hill you feel like you have to die on, or you could sit there and not bow your head when everybody else does. I mean, there's a spectrum of choices, and you have to decide as an individual what you're comfortable with doing. Like, I'm going to fall on the spectrum of I'm just not going to bow my head. I'll probably keep my eyes open, but I'm not going to take a dump on the table at dinner and make it an unpleasant night, because the consequences are minor. They're so minor. Yes, you can make a philosophical argument that any sort of acceptance of a religious idea gives that religious sentiment cover in society. And that is an argument I've made and will continue to make about the big stuff, right? That when the extremists act, it's because they're comfortable, because we've given so much cover to Christianity in our society that it makes them able to come out of the woodworks. But not telling your wife that she's not going to heaven is not that. We're not giving cover to religion there. We're being nice to a person who needs comfort. So,
and speaking to the situational aspect of it, if you're at someone's house and they have a blessing before the meal, mm-hmm. I don't pray. I just sit there. I don't make a scene. It's their house, their party, their rules. Now, if they were to say, Seth, knowing me, Seth, would you give the blessing? That's a boundary violation. Hell no, we're not doing that. And I'll tell them why. Or if it was a thing happening on my terms in my home within the walls of my space, and they attempted to co-opt it for religion. Again, what a great example of just how situational and complex these things are. And I think we have to put those puzzle pieces together to determine how we approach them.
Yes, 100%. I'd like to get another call. We have a few more super chats to read, so hold on to your hats. We've got a revelation here. Tons of Mice, who donated $5, has said that if you add in the call-in number for the show, 1 + 9 + 9 + 1 + 9 + 2 + 2 + 4 + 2, you get 37. And then he says, there you go. And that's the number that Steve, the Egyptian triangle guy, said was a very important number. So thank you, Tons of Mice. I'm not sure I should have read that. That reveals the conspiracy that we're in on it, but thank you for the $5.
We're part of the cover up. That's awesome.
Robin Rinsler, member for 2 months, donated $10 and said, hey, Seth, Robin here to say hi from Atheists United, San Luis Obispo, California. So there you go.
Oh, it's so good to hear from you. Yeah, it's funny. I haven't done it recently, but when I used to do speaking tours on the West Coast, it just sounds so pretentious when I say speaking tour, but I would do speaking events, and I would fly to the top of California, and I would rent a car, and I would speak all the way down. So it was like Sacramento, San Jose, LA, Riverside, San Luis Obispo. I'm doing them out of order. San Diego, and then I would fly home at the end of the week exhausted. But San Luis Obispo was always lovely. I think an hour or less from Pismo Beach. And what a great group you were. So please hug everybody out there for me, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Finally, we have Quantum Answer, member for 2 years, gave 200 Czech kronas. And he said, there is no lie in words of comfort, only necessary unspoken truth. There is no lie in words of comfort, only a necessary unspoken truth. And I think that's a great concept to ponder. It's almost poetry in my mind. So thank you, Quantum, for that donation. It's very generous. We only have a few minutes. I have one more call to put on, and we'll just take the call and get your thoughts, Seth. I know you've got to get going, but I do want to get this part in. We're going to be talking to Big Soap from South Dakota, who said that they would like to talk about is reincarnation is most likely the most likely result after death, but not in a religious way. So, Big Soap, I want to make sure I have you right. You're saying that reincarnation is the most likely result of death, like what's most likely to happen, but not in a religious way. Am I getting you right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Can you tell us how you came to this conclusion?
Yeah, so around the time I was 16, I was like, what was I going to say? Oh, right. This thought just kind of popped into my mind while I was bored at school. I was like, hey, wait a minute. This life exists. So therefore, it is obvious that existence is possible. And I've never seen a thing that only came around once, or anything that I'm sure has only happened once. So why would this life only happen once? Throughout all of eternity, just this life, and then nothing. And like some people give the argument like, oh, neuroplasticity, your brain would have to have the exact same structure for you to exist again. Or no, wait, not neuroplasticity. My argument is that neuroplasticity, right. They use the argument that you would have to have the same brain structure to exist as yourself again in another life. And my response is one word, neuroplasticity. And if you have to have the same process of neuroplasticity in your current life to exist again, then life is predestined. I can elaborate on that if you want me to, if that didn't make sense.
No, I think I've got the gist here. I have one question before we open it up for discussion. So you're making an argument about probability. You're basically saying this is most likely the result, right? Which means that there is some number of chances over some other number of chances, a numerator over a denominator. It's a 5 out of 9 chance, or a 6 out of 10 chance, or something. But you're saying it is the most likely, so it's the biggest chance. How did you come up with your denominator? As in, what data do you have?
Actual numbers. I just believe.
Okay, all right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Seth, what is your take on this sort of theory? I'm not sure I understand the point about neuroplasticity, but I wanted to sort of just take this call real quickly to talk about the concept of a sort of scientific reincarnation.
Well, obviously, my first question it has to be about the burden of proof. How would you recognize someone who had been reincarnated? How would you know? How do you define reincarnation? I hold to that. Was it, who was the astrophysicist who said something like, from stars we came from stars, and to the stars we shall return. I do hold to that sort of reincarnation model. All of the matter in my body will one day be reincorporated into the universe in some way. And there's a kind of poetry to that. But if we are all reincarnated again as ourselves, why am I not seeing the copy of myself? If that copy looks different, but is only an internal or brain copy, I should still be able to seek out those that I knew before, because it's still me. So, hey, it's me, Seth, everybody. I'm back with a different shell. How would that be measured in a lab? Right now, it just sounds like kind of an assumption, a belief. But how would we make that determined as a fact? I haven't heard any of that yet. So how would you determine it? How would you prove it? How would you demonstrate it?
What are your thoughts, Big Soap?
Well, I called in about this just to talk about it being a theory, really. I don't have any empirical evidence, so I'm not going to be like, oh, this is the case, you know. But basically, what I mean by reincarnation is that our consciousness itself transfers, not memories, not our body, not our atoms. Our consciousness, I would say, is not likely to exist just now and then never again for all of eternity.
All right.
Okay,
So
hang on. Forgive me, Graham. If my consciousness then is transferred to a next level, if I level up or level sideways or level down, without my life experiences and my memories, then I'd have to assert that that probably isn't me, because every moment that I have been alive, my experiences, my memories, those have shaped my values, my opinions, which will then motivate my actions and reactions, which really is me. So if some kind of a consciousness then is transferred to another form, another incarnation, but it lacks all of these other things that constituted me, I would assume it's not really me, right?
I suppose so, but what you're talking about, and this is just my take on it, is personality. Who you actually are is your consciousness, not your personality. That's who you are in this life. But your consciousness is you at the most base level.
I don't understand how you can have consciousness without memory. If we literally mean no memory, like if I popped into existence and I didn't remember everything that happened before this second, I wouldn't have, at least as my current understanding of where we as a thinking agent comes from, I wouldn't have any personality. I would be a tabula rasa, a blank slate, right? I think the key question here is, you're talking about a mind, basically. You're talking about some sort of consciousness or mind, things like that. We have never seen a mind that we have ever witnessed that is separate from some sort of physical substance, right? We see that we have brains and that a mind seems to come from that brain. And if we do something to the brain, our mind can change. We've talked about dementia early on the show. I've had experiences when I was going on pain meds that changed my perception of the world. We had from the late 1800s, early 1900s, the guy that got the railroad spike through his brain and he turned into a very angry person. So we know that the mind probably is an emergent property of the complicated brains. But you're asserting that the mind or the consciousness, that thing continues without that physical substance. How do you propose that works?
Well, how that would work in my perception of it, consciousness itself, at least within the laws of the reality of this universe that we know of anyway, would have to be generated by something. What I mean is that this vessel that we have, our current life, our current brain, is really not likely throughout all of eternity to be the only thing that can generate our mind, our consciousness. And I'd say our mind, our brain, our memory doesn't really go along with it. Consciousness, I agree that consciousness is just an emergent property of our brain, of it being generated. I have this theory as well, the side thing that consciousness is produced by
I know we're running short on time.
Yeah.
Well, let's just stick with the current one.
Yeah.
Are you saying, because some people will say, well, if you have an infinite amount of time or infinite number of universes, and if you infinitely shuffle every particle in the universe, that eventually you will come back to the same configuration as Seth Andrews' brain, and therefore Seth Andrews has now been reincarnated? Is that your argument?
No, that based on my theory, that is a possibility that would technically be a part of it. But the main thing is, what was I going to say? Oh,
well,
right.
Let's give Seth a chance.
This brings me back
we're running
to my
out of
point
time
about
here. Hold on a second, Big Soap. Seth, do you have any questions at this point? Because quite frankly, I don't think there's anywhere we can go with this one.
No, I mean, I think we've covered it. it sounds to me like, well, I think it's a guess, maybe it's a theory, but that's maybe an interesting conversation over coffee, but I haven't heard much we can actually sink our teeth into at this measure. So no, I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Big Soap. I really appreciate the call in. The theory speaks to sort of a Truth Wanted type of show, maybe. You might want to call in there and all of that. No more super chats, but we do have one more caller. Do you have a few more minutes, Seth?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, we're going to take the last call from Ellenie. Ellenie is from Arizona, and Ellenie, this should be a short one. Ellenie says, I don't agree with your take on biblical slavery. Nice quick call. So Ellenie, thank you for waiting and holding. What is it that you take umbrage with?
Hi there. Thanks for having me. So I wanted to call because I heard you, this was about an hour ago, you were speaking to someone else, and they were saying how slavery made sense for the time, like 2,000 years ago. And you were saying, oh, but do you condone it now? Like, are you saying, is it right or wrong? You were kind of putting him into like sort of a corner. But I think that's an unfair argument to make because there could very well be things that we deem as okay now. But in like the future, in a couple thousand years, we're going to think, oh my God, that's so immoral. I can't believe they used to do that. So that's why I think it's a weak argument.
Okay, let me explain myself. Let me defend myself for a few seconds. What I was doing there was not making a conclusory argument when I said, do you find it's acceptable now? Because I've had experiences with Benjamin calling in. I wanted to walk through the different possibilities. And what I got back to was eventually, if you had been alive back then, would you have found it acceptable then? And would you be right if you found it acceptable then? That's where I ended up. So I started with, okay, we agree that we it's bad now, because a lot of people will agree with that, but believe it or not, there's been people in the history of this show that have called in and said that slavery is just fine. So that's why I started at that point. But where I ended up with was, okay, if you were alive at 500 BCE, would you have believed that it was right? And I think he said yes. So I have to listen back. And then my question was, would you have been correct that it was morally right thing to do? And that's where he ended and said, oh, I don't know, maybe yes, maybe no. And we tossed to Seth and I talking about it, because I said that's a great answer, because it is slightly more complicated than people say. And I say that not because I think that the answer is yes, it would have been morally right to be a slave owner back then. I just think it's a more complicated one because people often confuse knowing things about morality and human suffering and religion with what is actually objectively true, if there is anything such as objective morality. So I hope I'm explaining that properly. Seth, did you have anything to add on that?
I think I stand by what we told the earlier caller. It's like if it had been a societal norm to execute someone for blasphemy in Bible times. And of course, it is not acceptable to us today. But hey, those were the standards and societal norms of that time, and they didn't have the information. It was a whole different culture. I just don't think that doing harm, and I literally put under that category, I would include owning another human being as property, which is a form of dehumanization. I just don't know how that becomes a time and place argument. I think it's either moral or it's not. Owning a slave, rape is either moral or it's not. Cutting off the hand of a disobedient wife is moral or it's not. Executing a rebellious child is either moral or it's not. And so I just reject this idea that it's contextual based on what century or millennium that you live in, especially under the umbrella issue of a deity that could have cleared it up and set better rules in the first place.
I agree entirely. So, Ellenie, I want to hear back from you in a second, but I just thought of another way to phrase this that might help frame the conversation. Let's suppose somebody says, at least it was understandable, if not moral back then, and it is not moral now. Let's say something happens and humanity is taken over by religious fanatics. and all of a sudden they make slavery legal again, or any of the list of horrors that Seth just listed right out of the Old Testament laws. And then centuries go by where we are practicing maybe religion-based slavery again in the year 2200 or 2300. Would it be morally correct then? What are your thoughts, Ellenie?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of that question?
Let's say something happens to the planet Earth now, some either political revolution or apocalyptic type of thing, but Planet of the Apes, let's say, right? And over the next 200 years, slavery comes back into moral fashion. People decide that it is okay to own slaves again, and they enact laws that legalize it. And over time, we sort of forget where we came from, that it was practiced. Then we realized what is good and bad at a better level. We realized that human flourishing is kind of a good thing and slavery is antithetical to that. But then we sort of kind of forgot, or maybe just politically a certain group of people took over and they just made it legal again and it became practiced again. Would it be legal? Would it be moral then?
In this hypothetical scenario, obviously, I mean, well, no, but I would like to put it this way. Do you think owning farm animals is ethical?
That's not what we're talking about here. That's a time for another call. We don't have enough time to get into that. But you said that, no, it wouldn't be ethical to own another human in the future. So what is the difference between the past, when we didn't own people, when we were at the caveman era, we maybe murdered them and had war, but at some point we started owning them because we had laws and we could dictate their behaviors and the threat of punishment. What's the difference between the future and the past? With both of those are times where we began owning slaves. What makes it okay in the past and not okay in the future?
What makes it okay in the past and not in the future? I think because with time we gain more like wisdom and information.
Okay.
I mean, to answer your question, I don't know if that's the answer we're looking for.
No, I think so. I think you're equating morality with whether we could know better. If I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically I think what you're saying is they didn't know any better back then. We know better now, therefore it's wrong. Is that kind of where you're coming from a moral standpoint?
Oh, okay. I think where I'm coming from, the argument that I'm trying to make, I'm trying to play devil's advocate a bit, is sort of how do we know what is moral and what isn't until much time has passed that we're able to look back with hindsight, you know? Because right now there's a bunch of immoral stuff that we don't even know that we're doing, you know? That we don't, you know.
Sure, absolutely. And if you figure out how to know what is moral and what's not in a definitive way, please let the world know, because we've been trying to do that for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So yeah, it's a challenging problem. What are your thoughts, Seth? How do you know what's right and wrong?
I don't know. I mean, if somebody takes a crowbar and hits me in the face with it, I know that's wrong. I know it's destructive. I know it's antisocial behavior. I don't need to have contextual history. I don't have to look at the history of crowbars to the face to know that that is instituting harm. I understand the larger point that she's making, you know, but I just, back then they didn't know what germs were. They didn't know what the stars were. They thought the earth was flat. They were superstitious about everything. They thought epilepsy was caused by demon possession, etc. But I don't think ignorance excuses it. I think it was wrong. They were just too ignorant in some context to maybe understand why it was wrong. And again, I lean for the third time back into the declaration that an all-powerful, all-knowing, omnibenevolent, omni-God would have been in charge of the entire plan, would have intervened to prevent the harm that was being done and implemented a better system. And he would have been able to explain it, to condescend in a way that these primitive humans could understand and implement. That God, limitless God, who was the master designer blueprinter, would have come up with a better plan and been able to explain why it's better. And I stand by that.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I want to thank Ellenie from calling. We don't have a lot of time, but if you want to continue that call, that's an interesting topic, and that's why it's a little trickier than people make it out to be, because the whole how do we know what's right and wrong, and can we blame people in the past? It all gets wrapped up into slavery is good or bad, and I am with you that I believe in the objective morality in the sense that. Matt Dillahunty has a famous speech on secular morality, the superior of secular morality. That's a very convincing method that basically says we're making a subjective choice that human flourishing, or however you want to make it, is the goal. And once we've done that, then there are objective measurements we can say it is objectively worse to own people as slaves than it is to not own people as slaves. So objectively, within the framework of trying to increase human happiness, flourishing, beneficial experiences, objectively, slavery was wrong forever. So I think that's where I would end up on that question. All right.
Nothing to add. I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have reached the end of the show. I really want to thank you, Seth, for coming. I know we have, I think, a promo slide. Do you want to tell us where people can find you out on the interwebs?
Oh, yeah, I'm around. You can Google my name, but I'm host of thethinkingatheist.com. My main personal website is sethandrews.com. I've got, the podcast. I host a second show called True Stories. I'm at 2 years on that. I'm kind of trying to decide if we're going to move forward. It's based on interest. It takes so much time to do, but I really do love doing it. If you both, hell, I'm out there. Just sethandrews.com is probably the best starting point. Just keep your expectations low, and thanks for stopping by. Okay.
Thank you so much. I want to thank our backup host as well, which and I think you are familiar and know Dr. Ben. We might be able to bring him on here. For people who don't know, we always have a backup host in case there are technical problems with one or both of the hosts. We kept the best one in reserve here. Dr. Ben obviously has been listening. What did you think?
I totally have imposter syndrome, right? Ben literally has a hive mind. Like, you ever see that old Trek episode with the teacher? They put the teacher on their head and they have infinite knowledge for a period of time. That's how I feel. Like, I need the teacher so I can sit next to Ben on screen. But
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I do kind of want that amino acid guy to call in next time I'm on Talk Human. I want to hear it.
All right.
You do that, I'll show up and I'll have pasties on my nipples. And we will have totally done a callback to everything that we've talked about on this show of relevance. Okay.
100%. Well, thanks so much for being here, everyone. And thank you especially to Seth for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. We're going to wrap it up. I want everybody to join us next week for our next live episode. It's at 4:30 p.m. Central every Sunday. Thanks again. Remember, the question of the week is: complete this sentence. If there is an intelligent designer, explain blank. Put your answers in the comments below, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
What will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the bullshit everyone around you buys? You think it's any of your business what goes on between my thighs? I wonder when we'll be rid of your lies.
Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.